In Part 1, we witnessed England on the brink of destruction. The Viking invasions had crushed every Anglo-Saxon kingdom except one, Wessex. With the fall of Mercia, Northumbria, and East Anglia, only Alfred of Wessex stood between the Great Heathen Army and total Viking domination. But against all odds, Alfred refused to surrender. He would become more than just a king. He would become England's last hope. Now, in Part 2, we uncover Alfred's rise to power. From his early struggles on the battlefield to his daring escape into the marshes of Somerset, this is the story of how a fugitive king transformed into a legendary warrior. How did Alfred turn his greatest defeat into his most defining moment? And how did he rally his shattered forces to reclaim his kingdom? Let's find out. The Viking invasions led to the creation of permanent Viking settlements, where they established their own laws, customs, and leadership. The Danelaw covered a large portion of England, including areas like York, East Anglia, and parts of Mercia and Northumbria. This established a new Viking culture and legal system, further undermining the native Anglo-Saxon control over those regions. By the time Alfred the Great ascended to the throne in 871 AD, Wessex stood as the last remaining stronghold of Anglo-Saxon resistance against the Viking invasions. The other kingdoms, Mercia, Northumbria, and East Anglia, had already fallen to the Norse invaders or were under their control. Wessex was the final bastion of Anglo-Saxon power, and its survival would ultimately rest on the shoulders of its new king. The fall of the other kingdoms. In the decades leading up to Alfred's reign, the Viking threat had progressively weakened the once powerful Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. Northumbria had fallen to Viking control in 866 AD, its capital York sacked, and the kingdom divided between native Anglo-Saxons and Viking settlers. East Anglia met a similar fate in 869 AD, when the Vikings killed King Edmund and established their rule over the region. By 874 AD, the Vikings had also conquered Mercia, the once mighty Midlands kingdom. Mercian leadership crumbled, and much of the kingdom was absorbed into Viking-controlled territories. With these three kingdoms lost, only Wessex remained unconquered. But even Wessex was under constant threat, facing relentless Viking invasions from the north and east. The Vikings, organized and strategic, were growing in power, and their raids seemed unstoppable. Wessex's isolation and vulnerability. Wessex, located in the southern part of England, was geographically distant from the Viking strongholds in the north, but it was not immune to the Norse raids. Its neighboring kingdoms had already fallen, and Wessex was surrounded by Viking territories, leaving it isolated. In the face of mounting pressure, Wessex's vulnerability grew, and the kingdom's survival seemed uncertain. Despite its strategic location, Wessex's leaders before Alfred had struggled to fend off Viking incursions. It had endured heavy Viking attacks and was weakened by years of warfare. Alfred's immediate predecessors, including his brother King Ethelred, had fought valiantly to preserve the kingdom. But the Vikings had already established a foothold in the region. Alfred's challenge was immense. Not only did he have to defend Wessex from annihilation, but he also had to unite the people of Wessex against an overwhelming enemy. The leadership vacuum. The situation in Wessex grew more dire when King Ethelred, Alfred's brother, and died in 871 AD. Alfred, the youngest son of King Ethelwulf, was not initially expected to become king. However, with the sudden death of Ethelred, Alfred found himself thrust into leadership at a critical juncture. Wessex had no time to mourn. The kingdom was already on the brink, with Viking armies ravaging its borders. Alfred's leadership would be put to the ultimate test. The absence of a strong, centralized leadership structure had been a major weakness in the defense of Wessex. The previous leaders had struggled to unify the kingdom's people and resources effectively. Wessex, like other Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, was a patchwork of smaller regions, each with its own local leaders. Alfred's first task would be to bring cohesion and coordination to this fragmented society. Alfred's crucial role in preserving Wessex. When Alfred ascended to the throne, the situation was grim. Viking forces had invaded much of southern England and were slowly tightening their grip on the kingdom. Alfred's immediate challenge was not just to defend his kingdom, but to restore a sense of unity, resilience, and hope among his people. Alfred quickly recognized that in order to preserve Wessex, he needed to do more than simply fight the Vikings in battle. His success would depend on shoring up the kingdom's defenses, creating strategic alliances, and reviving the morale of the people. His ability to inspire the Anglo-Saxon population was crucial in holding the kingdom together during this period of crisis. A king for the people. In addition to his military and political strategies, Alfred was a king who understood the importance of public trust. He led by example, often fighting alongside his warriors and showing personal courage in battle. The famous story of Alfred's retreat to the marshes of Somerset, where he allegedly burned the cakes, may be apocryphal, but it symbolized his connection to the common people and his humble perseverance in the face of adversity. His personal sacrifices, including his enduring illness and the strain of constant warfare, earned him the respect and loyalty of his people. As the leader of the last kingdom standing, Alfred's resolve became the symbol of Anglo-Saxon resistance. His ability to inspire unity in Wessex and later in the southern half of England was a key factor in the kingdom's survival and eventual success in turning the tide against the Vikings. The significance of Wessex's survival. Wessex's survival under Alfred was crucial, not just for the kingdom itself, but for the future of England as a whole. Had Wessex fallen, the Viking invasions would have likely been unstoppable, and the Vikings might have eventually gained complete control over the island. Alfred's success in preserving Wessex allowed for the eventual unification of England under his successors, leading to the rise of a more cohesive and powerful kingdom. In this context, saw Alfred's role as the defender of Wessex and the last hope of Anglo-Saxon England cannot be understated. He was not only the protector of his kingdom, but the linchpin in the larger struggle for the survival of the Anglo-Saxon way of life. Born in 849 AD, Alfred was the youngest son of King Ethelwulf of Wessex and his wife Osburh, who came from a noble family. Growing up in the royal household of Wessex, Alfred was surrounded by the privilege and splendor of court life. But his early years were far from the life of luxury one might expect. As the youngest son, he was not immediately in line to become king, and his life was shaped by a sense of duty, a desire for learning, and the looming threat of Viking raids. Alfred's childhood in the royal household of Wessex was far from ordinary. As the youngest son of King Ethelwulf, he had a front-row seat to the political and military challenges of the time. Surrounded by a loving family, a strong Christian upbringing, and an education that fostered both intellectual and spiritual growth, Alfred was shaped into a future king who would ultimately be remembered as one of the greatest rulers in English history. Though he was not initially in line for the throne, the lessons he learned in his youth of faith, duty, and resilience would later prove to be crucial as he rose to lead Wessex in its darkest hours. Alfred's path to the throne was anything but predictable. As the youngest son of King Ethelwulf, he was not initially seen as a likely candidate to inherit the crown of Wessex. In a world where birthright determined a royal's future, the throne typically passed to the eldest son, and Alfred had several older brothers ahead of him in line. His early life was therefore marked by a sense of being on the periphery of the royal succession, with no expectation that he would one day wear the crown of Wessex. The line of succession. Alfred was born in 849 AD, the fourth son of King Ethelwulf, and as the youngest, he was not considered the natural heir to the throne. His older brothers, Ethelstan, Ethelred, and Alfred's immediate older brother, Ethelbald, were all ahead of him in the line of succession. From an early age, Alfred likely understood that he would need to prove himself in ways other than inheriting his father's kingdom. In this royal household, the expectation was that one of his older brothers would take the throne. Tragedy strikes. Alfred's life would have been shaped by the knowledge that, unless some unforeseen tragedy struck, he would likely not become king. The royal court would have been focused on his older brothers, who were all being groomed for leadership, with Alfred's role more likely to be one of support. But fate has a way of turning expectations upside down, and Alfred's future would take an unexpected turn that would change the course of English history. Alfred's path to kingship was irrevocably altered by a series of tragic events. His older brothers, one by one, fell in battle or died prematurely, a stark reminder of the harshness of medieval life and the constant threat of Viking raids. In 860 AD, his older brother Ethelstan died, and in 865 AD, his other brother Ethelred passed away, both before reaching adulthood. By the time Alfred's father, King Ethelwulf, died in 871 AD, Alfred's immediate older brother Ethelred had already taken the throne. But he too fell in battle shortly afterward. This left Alfred as the unexpected heir. When Ethelred died after a series of failed campaigns against the Vikings, Alfred suddenly found himself thrust into a leadership role he had never anticipated. The kingdom of Wessex, already under siege by Viking forces, was on the brink of collapse, and Alfred's succession to the throne seemed a desperate gamble. The weight of responsibility. At the time of his brother's death, Alfred was just 22 years old. He had spent his youth preparing for a different role within the royal household, never expecting to lead the kingdom. Yet when the crown unexpectedly fell to him, Alfred rose to the challenge. It was clear that his inheritance of the throne was not by right, but rather by a turn of fate and necessity. He was suddenly called to defend his kingdom from the overwhelming Viking forces that were threatening to destroy it. Alfred's immediate rise to power was filled with uncertainty. The kingdom of Wessex had already endured years of Viking attacks, and the Viking raids were intensifying. Alfred had no prior experience as a ruler, and his young age made him seem like an unlikely leader in a time of crisis. Yet despite the daunting odds, Alfred accepted the crown, realizing that it was his destiny to defend his kingdom. A sense of destiny. Though Alfred's rise to the throne was unexpected, it would come to be seen as something that was meant to happen. In the face of overwhelming adversity, Alfred demonstrated qualities that set him apart from other rulers. He was determined, resourceful, and willing to adapt his strategies. His devotion to his kingdom and his people, alongside his military innovations, helped him overcome early setbacks and turn the tide against the Vikings. Alfred's journey to the throne was not one of mere fate, but of destiny. As he faced the challenges of leadership, he began to see himself not just as a king of Wessex, but as a protector of the Anglo-Saxon people. His role in history seemed inevitable once he rose to the occasion, and in the end, he proved to be the ruler England so desperately needed. Alfred's unexpected rise to power would lead to the unification of England and his eventual recognition as Alfred the Great. The unexpected greatness of Alfred's rule. Alfred's reign was defined by a remarkable sense of duty and resilience, which made his unexpected rise all the more meaningful. His time as king was marked by visionary reforms in military strategy, governance, education, and religion. These reforms would shape not only Wessex, but the entire future of England. Alfred's accomplishments were all the more impressive, considering the unlikely nature of his rise, which began with the unexpected death of his brothers and his swift assumption of a throne he had never expected to inherit. Alfred's legacy was not just one of survival, it was one of profound transformation. From the unexpected prince to the father of England, Alfred's path to power, though marked by tragedy, was also one of destiny. The very events that had seemed like misfortune turned out to be the forces that shaped Alfred into the king he was destined to become, forever securing his place in history as one of the greatest monarchs of England. When Alfred became King of Wessex in 871 AD, he inherited a kingdom on the brink of collapse, embroiled in an ongoing and brutal conflict with Viking invaders. His older brother Ethelred, who had been king, had died following a series of battles against the Vikings, leaving Alfred with a deeply troubled kingdom. The situation he inherited was dire, and it would take all of his skill, resolve, and leadership to steer Wessex through these perilous times. Alfred's ascension to the throne in 871 AD came at one of the most difficult moments in Wessex's history. He inherited a kingdom on the edge of ruin, facing a powerful and relentless Viking enemy, internal divisions, economic devastation, and the psychological toll of constant warfare. But Alfred's determination and leadership would prove crucial. Rather than succumbing to the overwhelming odds, he would rise to the challenge, forging a path toward victory and ultimately uniting England, a feat that would cement his place in history as one of England's greatest kings. When Alfred ascended to the throne in 871 AD, the Vikings were a formidable force that had already devastated much of England. His early years as king were marked by a series of defeats and setbacks, which would prove just how difficult his task was and how unlikely his eventual success truly was. The Battle of Ashdown, 871 AD, one of Alfred's first major engagements, was at the Battle of Ashdown in 871 AD. The Viking forces, led by Guthrum, were invading Wessex with the intent to conquer the last Anglo-Saxon kingdom standing. Alfred's army, though determined, was smaller and less experienced compared to the well-seasoned Viking warriors. The battle was hard fought, with Alfred and his brother Ethelred leading their forces against the Viking invaders. Initially, the Saxons were pushed back by the Vikings, but Alfred's forces managed a last-minute rally, leading to a victory. However, the win came at a high cost. Ethelred, Alfred's brother, was gravely wounded in the battle and would soon die, leaving Alfred to inherit a kingdom on the brink of collapse. The Battle of Merton, 871 AD, only a few weeks after Ashdown, Alfred was forced to face the Vikings again at the Battle of Merton. Once again, the Saxons were overwhelmed by the Vikings' sheer numbers and experience. Despite Alfred's determination, the battle ended in a hard defeat for Wessex. This was a critical moment in Alfred's early reign. His forces had failed to protect the kingdom from further Viking encroachment, and it became clear that, despite his courage, Alfred's position as king was incredibly fragile. the long exhausting campaigns. For the next few years, Alfred would face a series of Viking incursions that stretched his resources and tested his leadership. These early years were marked by a series of setbacks, where Alfred's forces were either defeated or forced to retreat. In many of these battles, the Vikings outmaneuvered the Saxons, using their superior tactics, cavalry, and naval strength. Alfred was forced into a defensive position, continually fighting to protect Wessex from the ever-growing Viking threat. Retreat to the marshes of Somerset, 878 AD. By 878 AD, Alfred faced one of the darkest chapters in his early reign. After a series of devastating defeats, he was forced to retreat into the marshes of Somerset with a small group of loyal supporters. The Vikings, under Guthrum's leadership, had overrun much of Wessex, and Alfred's position seemed hopeless. This retreat, though humiliating, marked a turning point. It was here that Alfred's legendary resilience was born, as he began to regroup and strategize for a comeback. According to legend, during his time in hiding, Alfred's forces were so worn down that he was said to have taken refuge in a humble cottage. The famous story of Alfred burning the cakes, where he allegedly failed to keep a peasant woman's cakes from burning because he was too deep in thought about his plans, emphasizes the sense of humility and personal vulnerability he felt at this moment. It was a moment of seeming failure, and Alfred's forces were on the brink of collapse. Yet it also marked the moment where Alfred's resolve was strengthened, and he began to devise a strategy for a final stand. The Battle of Edington, 878 AD. From the ashes of these early defeats, Alfred began to rebuild his army and his strategy. His resilience during these setbacks was what made his eventual success so remarkable. By 878 AD, after months of preparation, Alfred rallied his forces and launched a surprise attack on Guthrum's Viking army at the Battle of Edington. The outcome was nothing short of remarkable. Alfred, despite his earlier setbacks, managed to decisively defeat the Vikings. Guthrum, the Viking leader, was forced to sign the Treaty of Wedmore, which effectively divided England between the Saxons and the Vikings, allowing Alfred to maintain control over Wessex. The victory at Edington was not only a military triumph, but a testament to Alfred's ability to rise from the ashes of his earlier defeats. The making of a leader, Alfred's early defeats and vulnerabilities are what make his eventual success even more significant. His journey was one of constant struggle, where every victory felt hard-won, and every defeat threatened to undo everything he had worked for. His early battles demonstrated his vulnerability. He was not the undefeated warrior that many kings before him had been, and his kingdom was not guaranteed to survive. But through his perseverance, strategic thinking, and ability to learn from past mistakes, Alfred emerged victorious. His early setbacks allowed him to hone his leadership skills and devise the reforms and military innovations that would eventually lead to his unification of England. Alfred's ability to bounce back from failure, not only once but repeatedly, set him apart as a leader and is one of the key reasons why he became known as Alfred the Great. In the end, Alfred's story is one of transformation, turning early vulnerability into lasting success. His rise from the ashes of defeat is what ultimately secured his legacy and made him one of the most admired kings in English history. Alfred's reign laid the groundwork for the England we know today, from his brilliant military strategies to his legal and cultural reforms. But his story didn't end there. His legacy continued through his successors, shaping the future of the kingdom. In part 3 of this video, we'll explore how Alfred's son, Edward the Elder, and his grandson, Athelstan, completed the unification of England and secured its future. So stay tuned, because the story of Alfred the Great is just getting started.